Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be with you here today to share some exciting findings from the baby's first year study. Before I begin and jump in, I want to give acknowledgement. This is a very large project, and I've been working with my colleagues on this for over 10 years. There was a lot of planning that had to go into it. So I want to acknowledge Kim Noble, who is my collaborator at Teachers College. She's a neuroscientist. Greg Duncan is an economist at UCI School of Education. Nathan Fox is a neurodevelopmentalist. He's at the University of Maryland. Lisa Janetian is an economist at Duke in their public policy school. And Hiro Yoshikawa is a developmental psychologist at NYU. We also have my own colleague here at UW-Madison, Sarah Halpern-Meakin, who works with us by running our qualitative study, which I won't have time to tell you much about today, but we're very grateful for her in that she has really helped us learn from the mother's eyes their experiences with our project. And then finally, it's always important to uplift the emerging scholars. Sonia Troller-Renfree is a neuroscientist, and she's joining Teachers College as an assistant professor this coming year. And Molly Costanzo is a postdoc at UW-Wisconsin with her PhD in social work. So what I'm about to talk to you today about is some science that we have been working on for a long time. But I feel like whenever we are talking about our findings and our science, the most important thing for us to do is to first thank both the communities and the families who have been part of this project. It is a lot to trust and partner with us, and we are grateful for their commitment and their support and their participation. And we hope that we will be collaborating with them for many years to come. Now, when we started this project, all of us who are working on it, or many of us who are working on it as the PIs, we came to this from having studied in the US context changes in welfare programs. And we know that across the world, but also in, again, the US context, there are many different policies which affect family incomes: taxes, nutritional assistance or support, housing subsidies. And in many of our policy debates, what becomes focused on is how the adults do. Are they working more or less? Are they able to pay taxes? You know, what happens to the adults? And we felt very strongly that that's a short-sighted perspective on the well-being of a community. And particularly important is understanding how policy changes that affect family income will affect children, right, as they're embedded in these families and they are the children of the parents. What happens to them? And we know from long literature in the social sciences that there is correlational and suggestive evidence that differences in income, and again, in the US context, about $4,000, can predict later outcomes. It predicts children's cognitive development, their school performance, whether or not they're graduating from high school. And then interestingly, also when they're adults, how much they're earning, how much they're employed, and their health. Now, this is very compelling evidence, but it also is truly correlational. So it's really hard to know that it's differences in the income that are making a difference rather than other family background differences that might be affecting children as they grow up. And in particular, there's some good quasi-experimental evidence, mostly related to policy changes and a few other things like casino openings, again, in the US context, that suggest that income matters later in life, in adolescence or later childhood, but nothing that was focusing on young children. And this is largely because young children are somewhat harder to study. They don't show up in administrative databases, and they're not already enrolled in a study when a policy change happens. So we were really focused on trying to understand the causal effect of income on children's development during early childhood. And this is the time when we know that brains are especially sensitive to early experiences. So we designed a study to do just that. It's a randomized controlled trial looking at the impact of cash transfers in order to help us learn more about what poverty reduction and these cash transfers can mean during early childhood for development. In this RCT, we launched it, started recruiting families in May of 2018, and we recruited 1,000 low-income mothers in a hospital maternity ward right after giving birth. So that literally means we had field staff going into a hospital room and asking a mother first if she was eligible, and then if she would participate in a longitudinal research study. We did it in 4 metropolitan areas in the US, New Orleans, Omaha, the Twin Cities, and New York. And we picked these because they varied in the demographics of the types of families they served with respect to race and ethnicity. We picked them because they differ in the US in terms of their policy generosity. So New York and the Twin Cities provide much more support to low-income families than does, say, New Orleans. So we wanted some diversity for the types of families being served. We then, after mothers participated in a baseline survey, we literally gave them the opportunity to join a lottery. And the lottery had 2 outcomes. About 40% of the mothers were going to receive $333 a month. That's about $4,000 US a year. And it was going to be loaded on a debit card so that they would get it every month. And then we wanted to have a comparison group that would help us understand the impact of the money, but that would have the same access to the debit card. So 60% of the group of the 1,000 got a what we call a low cash gift, $20 a month. That's about $240 a year. Now, originally, when we planned the study, we were going to be giving the gift for 40 months. That's just 4 months past the child's 3rd birthday. We were in the context of the pandemic, and we knew that we would be unable to collect the outcome data from the children that we were hoping for. So we went ahead and extended the payments to 52 months. That would allow us, we're just starting next week, actually, we'll be calling moms to bring them in and get new data collected when the children are 4 years old. And at this point, we are thinking that we're going to be able to actually even extend the cash gift longer to 76 months, and that's just past 6th birthday, with the idea that we'll be able to say something about cash support for the entire period of early childhood, right up until, in the US context, children are in the formal school setting. Now, we have a developmentally informed theory of change. We don't think money in and of itself, just having it sit in your pocket, is going to do anything. But what we understand from prior literature is that there's 2, somewhat simplistic, but 2 pathways by which increased income, reduced poverty will help children and families. And the first is that we know that money actually can provide things that are good for children, and that when parents have more money, they'll spend it on things that are good for the children. So this is everything from books to toys, higher quality childcare, more regular health care. Some families, it might mean that they can move apartments and neighborhoods. And for other families, it means that they can maybe get a car so they can drastically reduce their commute time and spend more time with their children. So it's literally the pathway by which parents deploy the money. They know best how to spend it themselves in ways that's going to make their family better off and support their children's development. The other way in which theory has suggested that money can really help families is by reducing their psychological distress. And that's both stress, but also things like bandwidth and improving attention. So we know in the US context, for many low-income families, just simply making it through a month and being able to pay for everything that they need, formula, diapers, especially for young children, it's quite expensive, is a very complicated, time-consuming, and stressful experience. So we think that providing mothers and families with regular cash support, that they may experience less of that psychological distress, and that may enable them in turn to have better relationships with their children, to be interacting more, to be more warm, more nurturing, and less harsh. So those are the pathways that we are interested in studying and believe might lead to have higher levels of cognitive, socio-emotional, and brain development for the children who are in the BFY families. Now, it took us, as I said, we were planning the study for quite a while, and part of the planning was trying to figure out how to give away cash in the US context. What we landed on was a debit card, which was branded with "For My Baby." So it's a little bit of a nudge for the mother to think about the baby in terms of spending. And it's dispersed or loaded onto the debit card on the same day of the month that the child was born. So my youngest child was born on November 3rd. If I was in the project, then the 3rd of every month, I would have my dollar amount loaded onto the card. And we also provide text reminders for each disbursement. So moms know that it's loaded. And we also provide a call helpline. There's a little number on the back of the card, which is to us, not to MasterCard, so that we can help with any issues that come up or any questions that mothers have. Now, it's funded by charity, philanthropy. It's not government money at all. So we did not need to get Social Security numbers for individuals. In the US context, this is important because many people are uncomfortable providing those numbers, concerns about government involvement, particularly around immigration. It's not taxable, so they don't have to report it as income and pay taxes on it. And most important, and again, this was a large part of our planning process, we were able to get agreements from state and local governments so that they won't lose eligibility for other public welfare benefits. So nutrition assistance, childcare subsidies, any other state cash assistance does not get reduced because of this benefit. And in the US context, that typically would happen. If you got $4,000 more of income, you'd have to pay more, you'd lose some of your other public benefits. And to date, we've put over $6 million in the hands of the mothers who are participating in BFY. Now, I'm going to give you a quick roadmap for where the rest of the presentation is going. I'm going to share with you some findings on infant brain activity that Sonia Troller-Renfrey led and was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science earlier this year. And then I'm going to provide some findings on different aspects of family investments and process. These are analyses in progress with draft papers written, but not yet in press. So you get an early look. And then afterwards, when I'm done with the presentation, you all will have time to ask questions of me and get information clarified. I'm sure there's a lot of details I'm leaving out that you'd be interested in hearing about. So let me tell you a little bit about our sample. So in a randomized control trial, the first thing you have to worry about is making sure that the lottery process works and that the groups are balanced. And I'm happy to tell you that on 30 characteristics that we've measured, there is balance across our sample. So the randomization worked. We have a diverse sample. They're about 40% Black, about 40% Latina, and that's both Mexican, Dominican, and Honduran, so it's not just one group there. About 20% of our sample is married. Another third of our sample is living with typically the father of their baby, so a romantic partner, but not married. And then about the remaining, if I can do this right, the remaining 40% are either living on their own or living with other family members. About 60% of these moms were working while they were pregnant or working outside of the home. And many reported plans to return to work. The average household income. So to be enrolled in the study, you had to have a household income that fell below the US poverty threshold. So for a family of 3, that's about $24,000. And you can see that this sample of mothers reported a household income of about $22,000. So that's, in the US context, that's really quite low. And it also means that the $4,000 that we're providing constitutes a little less than 20% of their income. So while it's not the most generous cash transfer that you can imagine, it does represent a significant part of their income. And not surprisingly, as these are low-income mothers, most of them reported receiving some types of public government benefits. The great news about our study, or a highlight of our study, is this is a population that is mobile, busy, hard to track, but we've had incredibly high research participation retention rates. So we just stopped our 3rd year of data collection. And again, we have over 90% of that baseline sample participating in data collection. And we're incredibly grateful. We partnered with the SRC at the University of Michigan, the Survey Research Center, and they've been incredibly successful in engaging our mothers in data collection. Now, it's an ambitious project and it's been going for a while and it's not done yet. So let me give you a sense of the timeline. We started recruiting mothers and we did a year of rolling enrollment. So it went from May to June of 2019 to enroll our 1,000 mothers. And really all we did at baseline, other than get consent to participate, was a baseline survey. We did ask for permission to follow up for a subsample to participate in a qualitative data collection. And we have mothers that are doing that in New Orleans and the Twin Cities, about 80 mothers total. And we also requested permission to go to state and local government and get administrative records on things like public welfare receipt and other services. In 2019, we started our age 1 data collection, and we were about 2/3 of the way through, a little less than 2/3 of the way through when the COVID pandemic occurred. So at that time, we'd been doing in-person data collection. We had a survey, we were videotaping parent-child interactions, we were collecting hair samples to get a measure of mom's cortisol stress. And we were lucky in that literally months before a company had produced, developed, and put on the market a mobile EEG cap, so that we were able to be collecting information. I'll say more about this when I get to these findings. We were able to be collecting brain activity in children's homes, which is pretty phenomenal. Unfortunately, with COVID, all of that had to stop. We quickly were able to pivot and just continue with phone interviews. And we have been doing phone interviews ever since. So our age 2 was a phone interview with a mother. Our age 3 was a data collection, was phone with a mother. And you can see the gold star where we are, middle of 2022. We literally next week will be starting to schedule in-person laboratory sessions where we'll be able to get another survey, but most importantly, we'll be collecting in-person assessments of child's development. So again, another assessment of brain activity, cognitive, behavioral, and physical development, and direct assessments, which is really important for young children. Parents are good reporters, but really not great reporters of their children's development. So one lesson is stay tuned. There's a lot more coming when we have this year for data. Okay, so I'm going to jump into the findings from our Proceedings of the National Academy of Science paper. And the first thing that I want to say is that while our study is interested in understanding the impact of poverty on the brain, our interest in the brain really stems from the fact that it's just a central part of developmental processes and one that is sensitive to experiences and is in some ways a precursor to understanding children's later development, which is to say, if you take a 1-year-old and you track how many words they know or whether they can walk, that is a very, very blunt way of understanding how they're doing. And the neuroscientists on our team will tell you that brains can provide information that maybe is not obvious through these other metrics that have been developed. So we are interested in the brain, but only because it provides context about overall developmental processes. And we in no way think that impacts on the brain are more important than broader impacts on school readiness, mental health, and a range of other critically important outcomes. So the neuroscientists will tell you that we use electroencephalography, EEG for short, to measure infant brain activity. Now, this is a cap that's placed electrodes actually on the scalp, and it's incredibly great for young children because it's safe, fast, and simple. So for those of you that know more about brain development, you think of things like MRI or fMRI, where you go into the tube. It is impossible to do that type of data. It's not impossible, but it's impossible to do at scale that type of data collection with children who are 1 year old. Now, the EEG cap is used to measure children's brain activity. And it really works like a microphone, right? You have electrodes that are placed at the surface of the brain, and it is amplifying the activity that's happening in the brain so that we can then record it. And brain activity happens at different speeds. There are fast speeds or fast oscillations. Those are your gammas and your betas. And then there's medium, alpha, and a much slower wave type called theta. And so when you're processing brain activity data, when you're processing the EEG data, what you're doing is breaking it down into these different brain speeds, these different speeds of brain waves. Now, early in life, at birth, they have done studies where they get mothers to agree to have their infants' brain activity measured literally when they're born. What you see is that there's no difference, and these are correlational studies, so take them with a grain of salt, but you don't see differences in brain functioning or brain activity by SES. But if you fast forward a few years, a year or two, they start to emerge. And so this is why when we were designing the study, hypothesized based on these data that we were going to see differences in brain activity. So children who are living in economically disadvantaged environments often show less of the higher frequency power. This power is associated with an alert state, focused attention. So you see less of that focused attention, high frequency power, and you see more low frequency power. And this is associated with sort of a drowsy, sleepy, less attentive state. So we hypothesized that by providing the cash gifts, we would see more of the high power, more of that attention and focus, and less of the lower frequency, less of the drowsy. It turns out these patterns are associated with later school readiness and cognitive development, including language outcomes. Again, those studies are correlational, so it's very suggestive. It doesn't predict, one-to-one that we know that this will lead to better school readiness, but it's a pattern that's associated with it. And this is what we expected to find or to test, really, in our study. So I mentioned that there was a new mobile cap that we were able to use, and it was developed literally right before we were hitting the field. So much so that I think the very first early efforts, we had some technical problems with it, but we worked really hard to make sure that families were comfortable. We had videos and FAQs, and customized caps, because you really have to make sure that the sensors can get to the skin. And so different hairstyles can provide challenges, but you can see pictures of this little cap and the children. Amazingly, we did pretty well. We worked hard, and the majority of the families agreed to try it. At the end of the day, we got 84% of the babies were successfully capped. They won't be successfully capped if they start to fuss. We call it fussing out, if they're crying, if they're upset by the cap, if they're scared. And at the end of our effort, we ended up with 435 children who provided usable EEG data, and that's 72% of the in-person sample. You recall that because of COVID, we had to stop short this data collection, so our sample size was significantly lower than we had hoped when we started it. This is what we predicted, and I'm just going to give you a visual. Along the bottom is the different bands of hertz, that's how they're measured. And you can see that in the theta and the alpha, in the theta region, we expected the high cash gift group to have less theta. The high cash gift group is represented by the darker line, the black line, and the low cash gift is the gray line. So we expected to see this pattern where the high cash gift group had more beta and more gamma and slightly and less theta. And what I'm going to do is jump ahead and show you what we saw, which is close to what we expected, but not exactly. So it turns out that we see a pattern of less theta, but it's not statistically significant. That's not large enough to suggest a real difference. But we do see differences as expected with respect to more of the beta and the gamma, more of the high frequency oscillation in our data. Now, again, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I do work with them. And one thing that you can do with EEG data in this screen, we're looking at whole brain activity. So it's the different bands, different speeds of oscillation across your whole brain. But what you can do is also look at it in a regional way so that you're looking at where in the brain is it happening. And this is just a visual representation to show you where we saw more of the fast-paced brain activity in the high cash gift group. So both the alpha and the gamma, and you can see it's right in that central region. Now, I'm going to pivot. Those are, I just summarized our PNAS findings. So I'm going to pivot now to talk more generally about how families are using the cash gift and what we've learned about their changes in family process as a result of the cash gift. So what have we learned about it? First, we learned that there are very few problems the moms are able to use the debit card. And generally, they use the money that's on the card quite quickly. The largest single way it's used is being taken out at ATMs, but we see a lot of different ways in which it is spent. And another large way is at what we call here in the US big box stores. So these are large Target or Walmart type stores that sell a lot of different types of goods at relatively low prices. But you can see they spend it at a car wash, transportation, auto supplies, grocery stores. It's in all sorts of places. Now, in the US, you can buy alcohol, depending on where you live, in a big box store or a supermarket, or in some states, you can only purchase it at a specified store that only sells alcohol or tobacco. And so we see very few transactions in those types of specialized alcohol or tobacco stores. What I want to do here, so this is going to be showing you mean differences in a variety of income. So one of the things you might wonder is whether when you provide money to people, cash money, unrestricted, unconditioned, as we are, whether they change how much money they're getting from other sources. So maybe they'll work and earn a little bit less, or maybe they will not apply for a public benefit not because they aren't eligible, but the hassle is too much. And essentially what we find is that about $282 of the cash gift remains. So there is a little bit of decline in other places. Most of it not statistically significant, but at the end of the day, when you look at how much money the families are reporting that they have coming in a year after they've been getting the gift, there's a $282 difference between the low cash gift group and the high cash gift group. And you can see the low cash gift group overall is reporting about $1,900 of income, and the high cash gift group is reporting about $2,100. And that is a significant difference, as we would expect, providing the cash income is increasing their overall economic resources. And if you go all the way down to the bottom, we have income to needs ratio, which is really the percent that are in poverty. If it was 1, then everyone would be right at the poverty line. And so what you see as with the low cash gift group, about 80% of them, or they're meeting 80% of their family needs. And when it increases in the high cash gift group, it's a difference of 9 percentage points. So they are about 9 percentage points less likely to be in poverty. This is really showing you how the $313 translates into $282. So there's a little bit more maternal earnings, a little bit less of other household earnings, a little bit less government income, and a little bit less other income, miscellaneous income, if you will. Now, so here's what we know. Let me just get this all on the table. Okay, so here's what we know about the family processes and family well-being. We see slightly reduced poverty, right? So this is the increase in household income that I was just showing you. We also see that mothers are spending more time engaging their children in reading, telling stories, and playing with your children. So we ask them a set of questions about how often they are doing these things with their infant, and they report doing it more often. So it's about a 6 percentage point difference in how often mothers report that they are regularly engaging in these activities with their children. We also see an increase in child-specific goods, and these are things like books and toys that you would spend for your child. And the difference in the first year is about $63. So we're seeing that a portion of that increased money that families have is being spent on things that are directly specific or directly targeted for their children. Now, there's also a range of things that we ask about, which we're seeing no differences between the high cash and the low cash gift group. And again, the reason that we compare the two groups is because we know that they're similar on all baseline characteristics. We know that they're a similar group of families. One set of the families, the high cash gift group, is getting this extra money. The low cash gift group has a debit card and it's getting $20 a month, but they the difference between them, that $313, is really able to identify or indicate when we see differences between the two groups. If the only thing that is different is that amount of money, then we know that those differences between the families is due to the money. So where we don't see differences so far is most measures of material hardship. So we ask a series of questions about whether they're having trouble paying bills on time, whether they have ever experienced homelessness or been evicted from their home. We don't see differences in that. We also ask a set of questions about how chaotic the home life is, to the extent to which there are routines, noise, lots of people in and out, regular plans. We don't see differences in that as a function of the cash. We aren't seeing differences either in the quality of housing or in neighborhood quality as reported by the mother. So you can think about using measures from our census that maybe would look at poverty rates or crime rates. We don't have that information yet, but this is simply the mother saying whether she finds her neighborhood safe to walk in, to go out in at night, that sort of thing. So we aren't seeing differences there. We're also not seeing differences on a range of mental health, happiness, life satisfaction, or self-esteem or self-efficacy measures, which is really what the HOPE measure gets at. So you'll recall we had a theoretical pathway that said, well, maybe providing cash to mothers will reduce the stress and reduce psychological distress, improve mental health. And we really aren't seeing, at least in this age 1 data, indication that it is working to do that. And then finally, this is a null finding that is potentially useful, at least in the US policy context, which is we did ask mothers how much they were spending on a set of goods that are certainly adult focused, but also maybe not considered healthy. And so we don't see mothers reporting that they're spending more money on alcohol or tobacco in the high cash gift group compared to the low cash gift group. So we're not seeing that the money increased spending on those goods. Oh, we also, sorry, that came in a bit late. We also aren't seeing differences in mothers' patterns of work. So we don't see that mothers are entering the labor force more quickly after the birth of their child, or that their children are spending more time in non-parental care, in child care, whether that is informal or formal. Now, one of the things that we try to really focus on or really hit home in terms of our messaging is to simply say that what I presented with you is really just the first year of data. And we have now designed this as a 4-year study. So trying to draw firm conclusions about what the impact of these cash gifts is really premature. It's kind of like trying to study the impact of college after just someone's first year. We know that there's a lot more to come. We're also really eager. We have this qualitative study that Sarah Halper and Meakin is running where we're hearing directly from mothers. And I think one of the most consistent things that we hear is how the money is spent differently by different families. So it really does mean different things to different families. Some initially were using it to buy just basic needs, a car seat, food, turning their lights on. Whereas we hear from other mothers that it enabled them them to start a small entrepreneurial business. They were able to use the cash to buy supplies to grow a sewing business, for example. So we know that we're going to learn a lot more from these interviews and from the process of hearing from moms in their own words, how they think about the money, how they're spending the money, and then many other things that are going on in their lives. But finally, as we're literally next week on the verge of starting to collect the data collection, we're going to learn a lot more this coming year about child health, literacy, behavior, more EEG data, mom and child stress, which can be measured from hair in a form of cortisol. We're collecting information on mom's mental bandwidth, and that's really sort of, do they have more brain energy or cognitive energy because they're not focused so much on trying to make ends meet? And then finally, some other biophysiological metrics that can tell us epigenetics, which can really tell us how quickly biological clocks are working. So it's a shorthand for biological aging, is the cash slowing down biological aging in a beneficial way. So in short, a lot more to be learned. We're really at the beginning and we have a ton more data to be looking through. I want to pause here. I noted my team members. We have a large supportive group of funders and students that are working with us, and it is truly a team effort. We wouldn't be able to do any of this without all of their support and help. I look forward to hearing what questions you have and a lively conversation about what these findings might mean for later on in terms of kids' development, but also for what they might make you think about in your contexts, in your communities. Thank you.